reparations, we need vacations, we need blue strips for all the time we spend waiting. We gon' kill for what we owe, Joe, we not playing. Mr. President, I think it's time we get paid. I watch all of my people die. Why your people try to act like we commit crime? Get killed on TV, got our kids scared to go outside. It's time you pick a side. Before we turn this bitch up, Mr. President, better fall in line. Yeah, we don't need loans, we need what we owe. We need police to stop killing sisters inside their home. And when it happened and we burn this bitch down, they need to stop telling us we was wrong. Ay, and we need unity. We need the government to stop bringing drugs in our community. They better stop playing, we not the ones. You got guns and we got guns. We kill if you play with our funds. Yeah, how we supposed to restore when they won't give us more? When they got knees on our necks when we walk out the store. How we heal when they go to the park, kill a 12-year-old boy for killing, we ready for war. Yeah, and we need reparations, we need vacations, we need blue strips for all the time we spend waiting. We gon' kill for what we owe, Joe, we not playing. Mr. President, I think it's time we get paid.
Peace, greetings to you all. Man, welcome to Freedmen University. We got Professor Ali in the building, aka Ali Scientific. Peace to the God. What's going on, God? What's going on with you?
Yo, peace. Glad to be here, man. Finally do this thing and address some of these issues about what we're going to be talking about.
Yes, indeed. I know some of you are probably looking in the YouTube channel and figuring out what's going on. We are on the Freedmen University channel right now. For those of you who are tuned in, those of you who are on the Twitter that watch us from Twitter, you already know what it is. It's coming from my page. But make sure you click like on the video, share the video out. We're going to have an important discussion tonight. We've had a lot of detractors since we've been doing this work. We've had people online talking about the freedmen were white. We've had people that have made insinuations that they were white, but that there were white freedmen. You've had people that made all types of crazy allegations. They found bad newspaper clips and that were worded bad, and they went on, like the one Moorish guy. He went on there, he thought he was doing something. We was just laughing at him because he
thought he ate with that, right? How they say
that's my daughter said. You thought you ate? He thought he ate, but we about to eat him up because that's what we do over here. Mr. Just the Facts and Professor Ali, you already know. So like I said, for those of you who are joining from the that usually watch us on the Be the Power channel, we are now on the Freedmen University channel again. Come on over from Twitter to the YouTube channel, click like on the video, share the video out, subscribe, hit the little bell icon next to the subscribe button so that you can be informed every time FU to the establishment that been trying to hold our information back and keep it out of the minds of our people. FU, Freedmen University, man. Y'all make sure y'all subscribe to the channel. Yo, without further ado, Brother Ali, man, and let me just also give a proper introduction. Brother Ali is the National Director of History and Research for the United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen. And, he's going to give a very powerful presentation tonight. So go ahead, brother, take it away.
All right, peace. So let me just set this up so we get everything ready. Let me know how it's looking. Can you see it? Oh, I shared it. So let me know when you can see it on the screen. Naheem, you there?
Yep, I'm there. Hold on. I did something wrong. Hold on 1 second. There we go.
All right. Well, first off, I just want to say greetings to everybody who's listening and or watching. Also, peace to the entire Freedmen Conscious family. And thank you all for tuning in and helping to spread this Freedmen consciousness around the country, because every little bit helps. This particular presentation is called White Freedmen in the United States, addressing confused Black people on social media. So let's jump right into this issue, because we're going to be speaking on this in a way that you won't hear from anyone else. Now, like Naheem just said, over the past couple of years, you had certain Black people on Twitter who have demonstrated that they're confused about who the American freedmen were at the time of emancipation from 1863 to 65 and who we are today. So in this confused state, certain Blacks on social media have raised this issue of the alleged white freedman. Some of this confusion we know is deliberate, because it's coming from people who are pushing various identifiers as being the right ones that the descendants of the emancipated should be using. So in essence, most of it, this confusion is actually rooted in ego. So what I'm going to do is explain from a scientific perspective. Science just means knowledge at its root. But from a scientific perspective, as opposed to ego, why there were no white freedmen in 1865, specifically within the context of the American Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, or the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, i.e., the supreme law of the land. I like to start with this image here. This is just one of the screenshots that was provided to corroborate this idea that there were white freedmen at the time of emancipation in the United States. Nevertheless, this is from a news article, and it's not a source of legal authority. But what we're going to use is the actual legal authority to show the meaning of the words freedman and freedmen, again, within the context of Reconstruction amendments, congressional acts of legislation, as well as various freedmen's aid associations and societies that were operating during the Civil War and the Reconstruction periods. Now, to the untrained eye, one might see this image and think that there's something to this white freedman thing, right? Because we see it on the screen, it's highlighted. But I'm here to show you that there's not. First off, like I said, this is from an article that was clearly speaking about Indian lands, as we see right at the top of it, i.e. Indian affairs, specifically the so-called 5 civilized tribes, and the governing act of Congress, which included the whites and Negroes who intermarried with those 5 civilized tribes. Secondly, the term white freedman, quote unquote, is highlighted here, was actually a typographical error, or as we say today, a typo. So how do we know this? How do we know that this was actually a typo? We know this by examining the special act of Congress referenced in the very first sentence. So let's go to the law and see what the law says about this. The special act of Congress referenced in the article was not the 1887 Dawes Act or the 1898 Curtis Act, both of which I've examined, but it was the act of May 27th, 1908. The actual act of May 27th, 1908, and the letter and the spirit of the law is clear in the text as well as the annotations that this pertains to Indian affairs and acknowledges the demarcation between whites and freedmen. The law does not use the terminology white freedmen, and thus Congress did not acknowledge any such people with this particular law. It reads very specifically, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that from and after 60 days from the date of this act, the status of the lands allotted heretofore and hereafter to allottees of the 5 civilized tribes shall, as regards restrictions on alienation or encumbrance, be as follows. All lands, including homesteads of said allottees, enrolled as intermarried whites, comma, as freedmen comma, and as mixed blood Indians having less than half Indian blood, including minors, shall be free from all restrictions. So the law shows the demarcation between whites and freedmen. It's very clear. You have to go to the law. This news article presents a typographical error. So that's one down. Here's another screenshot with the same terminology. The source for this particular image is really of no significance. The real point is obviously the error contained in the highlighted text. Yes, it's an error. It speaks about the Pennsylvania Constitution containing the words, quote unquote, white freedmen, as it relates to the state having a true Republican form of government, representative of all its people, and the issue of prohibition on Negro suffrage, which is a very non-Republican thing. So the question is, did the Pennsylvania Constitution contain the words white freedmen as the article is stating? Let's find out. Let's find out. Article 3 of the 1838 Pennsylvania Constitution used the words white freeman, as you see highlighted in yellow, as well as white free men, not white freedmen as erroneously stated in the screenshotted source. So the screenshot with the words quote unquote white freedmen in it is an apparent typographical error or typo, because the law does not say this. This is another one. This particular source is from a book called Our Southern Highlanders. It was published in 1913. In chapter 16 called Who Are the Mountaineers? The terminology white freedmen was employed by the author. It actually was employed by the author and thus was used on Twitter for the purpose of claiming that there were white freedmen and to say that the term is not usable by American blacks. However, context often eludes the contrarian. So let's examine this book to see what the context actually is. Here's a screenshot from that chapter. I could read the entire thing, but what I'm going to do is give a synopsis of it for the sake of time, and you all can either pause the video, you can and read the page, or you can screenshot it, or you can just pull the source up and read it later. It's called Our Southern Highlanders. You can find it online. Now, in this chapter, which in fact is chapter 16, called Who Are the Mountaineers, the author is speaking about bond servants of different types who were imported into the colonies from Britain in the 17th century. That means the 1600s. So this is referring to colonial America, not the United States. The issue is our American freedmen class and status comes from the actions of the United States and is again within the context of the Civil War, the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, and the 1865 13th Amendment, i.e. the supreme law of the land. Has nothing to do with colonial America. Now, I think it's important to point out that in this publication, there are no note numbers. Pay attention. There are no note numbers directing the reader to any footnotes, and thus there are no sources of reference. The author does not reference any legal writings by the provincial governments legislatively or judicially, nor does he reference any documents from colonial plantations to show that the specific term freedman was ever used respecting bond servants released from their indentures. This author's use of the phrase white freedman in this 1913 publication comes 50 years after the United States government began using the term freedman circa 1862 with the Freedmen's Hospital. So this source in no way proves that the term freedman was ever used contemporaneously by the provincial governments or plantations respecting white bond servants released from indenture, and could very well have simply been used as a literary tool by the author due to being influenced by the United States government's contemporary usage of it respecting so-called blacks, colors, or Negroes who were formerly enslaved in the United States. Let's move. Now, this was presented as a clipping from an article in a newspaper called the Washington Chronicle, published October 10th, 1865, Washington, D.C. We see here that it uses the language, quote, the black or the white freedman, end quote. And this was used to make the point that there were white freedmen, and thus the term shouldn't be used by American blacks. There's another image of it showing where the confused YouTuber who posted this cites the source as being the Washington Chronicle. So the point is clear. He wanted us to see the terminology white freedman being used. We have no idea whether the author of this news article was some jealous white man whose intent was to propagandize the works of the various Freedmen's Aid societies or to undermine the efforts of the Freedmen's Bureau or not. The fact of the matter is there were whites who were very angry that the Freedmen's Bureau was created to assist specifically the emancipated blacks. And there was those who were arguing for the creation of the Bureau for Dutchmen, for Englishmen, and other types of white people. So they were very angry. And I don't know why this person used the term white freedman. It could again been a typographical error as in it was in the other articles. But the fact of the matter remains, within the context of Reconstruction, the Civil War, the Reconstruction Amendments, the 1863 Emancipation Proclamation, the 1865 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, there are no white freedmen, and the government does not acknowledge any such thing. Let's move. Interestingly, however, this is very interesting. No one else besides black people on Twitter and one particular YouTuber seem to have any confusion about who the term freedman actually applied to in the United States. In the SCOTUS case of Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and UNC, Justice Thomas claimed that the term freedman was a race-neutral category and freedman a under-inclusive proxy for race. Him making that claim caused a bunch of white professors of history, as well as Juris Doctors, who were either practicing attorneys or law professors at some university, to tweet in response to his claim and state that it was impossible and ahistorical because everybody knows that the term freedman was specific to African Americans or so-called blacks, colors, and Negroes in the United States. So, for example, as we see on the screen here, on the left, you see where Dr. Manisha Sina, president of the Society for Historians of the Early American Republic and Draper Chair, UConn, said that freedmen referred to black people, formerly enslaved, refugees to all Southerners. On the right, you see Adam Serwer, who was writing for The Atlantic, who actually missed the point completely that Justice Thomas was making, but he specifically stated that freedmen cannot be a formally race-neutral category because American slavery was not a formally race-neutral institution. By that, he means that slavery was specific, race-specific to black people. Therefore, freedmen also must be race-specific to black people. But it's very interesting that black people on Twitter and on social media are the only ones confused about this, where other people are very clear. Before getting into the actual legal authorities, even though we kind of already did by showing the excerpt from Thomas's concurrence of the affirmative action case and Professor Sina's tweet, I want us to examine some forms of servitude. The Library of Congress provides us with 3 conditions of servitude outside of the condition of chattel enslavement. We see indentured servants, apprentices, and then convicts. Now, these are 3 different statuses that people categorized as white have occupied in American society. They describe the differences between the 3 with indentures, number 1, being agreements between 2 parties about long-term work. Then apprentices were traditionally young people who have been bound out to a master to learn a trade. And then you had, thirdly, transported convicts that were convicted of felonies and sometimes escaped a death sentence when they were sentenced to transportation to the Americas. Here we have an image from the Shirley Eustace House, which is a museum in Roxbury, Massachusetts. They have an exhibit there called Slavery versus Servitude, where they outline the distinctions and definitions. This image depicts an indentured kitchen maid and an enslaved girl. They're 2 primary forms of labor that characterized English colonial societies. enslavement, and then servitude. Enslavement is the focus of this particular exhibit, and it describes when one person purchases another, eliminating their personal rights and treating them as a piece of property. Servitude, on the other hand, is the payment of a person for services or work carried out for another person. And while servitude is characterized by lower class members of society, enslavement became, starting in the 18th century, characterized by race. Servitude could also include whites as well as people of color, but it also referred to people who retained some level of personal human rights. Their labor, rather than their bodies and personhood, was the object for sale. So we just want to point out a distinction between enslavement and servitude, because enslavement is from there was the status change to freedmen, not servitude or bond servants. A pertinent a very, very pertinent question to be answered as it relates to the existence of white freedmen within the context, again, of the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the 13th Amendment is this: were there white slaves at the time of emancipation? And the answer to this is that particularly by the 19th century, was a system based almost entirely on race, specifically targeting people of African descent. And by this time, the institution of slavery was deeply entrenched as a racialized practice, with laws and social customs strictly demarcating the enslaved population as Black. However, there are various images, as we see, of some apparently white children who were called, quote unquote, white slaves. So, what's the explanation for this? We have to look at the Emancipation Proclamation as well as uh, Freedmen's relief. So when Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation took effect January 1st, 1863, thousands of enslaved people living in the rebelling Confederate states found that they had been instantly, quote unquote, freed. Now, technically, this was true, but the logistics involved in actually restoring a free and equal status to the newly emancipated people was, to say the least, staggering, right? Without money and education, not to mention the additional challenges of living in a war-torn and racially prejudiced country, the former slaves, the freedmen, faced apparent insurmountable challenges to finding some means of subsistence. Northerners and abolitionists quickly deployed relief organizations such as the Friends Association of Philadelphia for the aid and elevation of the freedmen. These groups worked tirelessly to acquire supplies, establish schools, and provide other forms of support, but resources were limited. So, moreover, it was not easy to arouse the sympathy of countrymen who were preoccupied by the war, and then more often than not, ambivalent on the issue of African American slavery. And by December of 1863, much of Louisiana was occupied by the Union Army. It had 95 schools serving over 9,500 students, including almost half of the Black children in Louisiana were running under its auspices. But keeping these schools up and running will require ongoing financial support. And to this end, the National Freedmen's Association, in collaboration with the American Missionary Association, as well as interested officers of the Union Army, launched a new propaganda campaign. So we get into it. 5 children and 3 adults, all former slaves from New Orleans, were sent to the North on a publicity tour. A drawing of them, as we see right here in this image, was printed in the January 30th, 1864 issue of the popular Harper's Weekly, bearing the intriguing caption, quote, "Emancipated slaves, white and colored," end quote. The authors of this campaign were pursuing a surprising and quite effective strategy for arousing sympathy for Blacks. What they did was they portrayed all of them as, well, they portrayed these children as being white. What does that mean? The white slave propaganda campaign included images of children with predominantly European features photographed alongside dark-skinned adult slaves with typically African features. All these people, including the seemingly white children, were classified, listen, as black under the one-drop rule, as they had both black and white ancestry. Again, this was a propaganda campaign of abolitionists designed to raise funds for the aid and relief of the freedmen. In other words, these children, even though they labeled it as white slaves and they have apparent European features, these children, under the one drop rule in Louisiana, these people were classified as black. And so therefore they used them for this particular propaganda campaign. Now, here, I want to make a very important point for actual legal scholars who may be listening before I jump into the law dictionary. We are fully aware that law dictionaries and encyclopedias are not primary sources of legal authority. We completely understand that. However, we're also aware that secondary sources as such are useful for helping to understand and locate primary sources of legal authority. Legal dictionaries provide definitions of words in their legal sense and usage, including foreign and Latin legal phrases, which is going to become part of the conversation. A legal dictionary may also give examples of use in a legal context. Black's Law Dictionary provides a basic definition for each word and often cites primary sources of legal authority. So, here's an image of the definition of freedman from the second edition of the Black's Law Dictionary, which was published in 1910. It reads, in Roman law, one who was set free from a state of bondage and emancipated slave. The word freedman is used in the same sense in the United States respecting Negroes who were formerly slaves, not so-called white people, Negroes. This is the Law Dictionary, but the Law Dictionary is drawing this from sources, primary sources of legal authority. So the second edition, unlike the first, actually cites the primary sources. So let's look at the first one, which is actually the Connecticut Supreme Court case of Fairfield versus Lawson, which some of you might have already seen us use previously. The findings, pay attention. The findings of the court in this 1883 case are important in demonstrating their acknowledgement of freedmen as a class of people that not only included the emancipated, but also their descendants. However, the court in this case doesn't refer to the specific race or color of the freedmen, but what they did was they cited an earlier Indiana Supreme Court case that does, which was the case of Grimes's executors versus Harmon. Fairfield versus Lawson reads this. The cogent reasoning of Buskirk J. in giving the opinion of Grimes's executors versus Harmon et al. Furnishes most ample support for the positions we have taken in this discussion. In that case, the bequest was, quote, to the Orthodox Protestant clergymen of Delphi and their successors to be expended in the education of the colored children, both male and female, in such way and manner as they may deem best, of which a majority of them shall determine, my object being to promote the moral and religious improvement and well-being of the colored race. So the court, after a most exhaustive and able review of the authorities, held that the legacy was void for vagueness and uncertainty, placing the decision upon the following propositions, among others, that the testator intended that his beneficiaries should be selected from the children of the colored race residing within the United States. So they're pointing out the race or color classification of the freedmen, of the children, the freedmen children at the time that this particular case was heard, Grimes executors versus Harmon. Let's move forward. Now, as to the findings of the court regarding the freedmen as a growing class, I need all of my professors to pay attention, all of my historians and everybody who thinks that this term does not include us. I want you to pay attention here. As to the findings of the court regarding the freedmen as a growing class of people due to its inclusion of the descendants of the emancipated, it reads, it is found that the term freedmen as used in the will refers to that class of persons who were emancipated during the late Civil War and their descendants. It goes further and qualifies it as a matter of common knowledge. We may be permitted to say that the numbers composing this class are now about 6 million. Now, for those who would prefer to feign ignorance here, the phrase common knowledge, according to Oxford Languages, means something known to most people. This means that outside of its usage in the will or in the judiciary, freedmen being a class of people that included the descendants of the emancipated was common knowledge in society. Again, this case was decided in 1883, while national emancipation occurred in 1865, demonstrating that in less than 20 years, this particular freedmen class grew by 2 million people, from the original 4 million emancipated to then 6 million with that status. Also, we should note that the Freedmen's Bureau had been shut down for 11 years by this point, and yet this class of freedmen continued to grow. So we, at the United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen and Be the Power, we proffer that this class today is comprised of close to 50 millions of us. Another primary source of legal authority cited in that Black's Law Dictionary definition was the 1877 South Carolina Supreme Court case of Davenport versus Caldwell. Now, in this case, the court cites the 1865 South Carolina Black Codes, where on page 245, it categorizes all freedmen and freedwomen as being, quote, persons of color, not so-called white people. Let's look at another primary source of legal authority speaking to the color or race of the American freedmen. The American Freedmen's Inquiry Commission was established during the Civil War after the enactment of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 to determine the condition of formerly enslaved people. This commission was appointed in March of 1863 by United States Secretary of War Edwin McMaster Stanton to, quote, inquire into the condition of the colored population emancipated by acts of Congress and the proclamations of the president, and to render and report what measures are necessary to give practical effect to those acts and proclamations so as to place the colored people of the United States in a condition of self-support and self-defense. This is about, quote unquote, colored people, Negroes, blacks, Afro-Americans, African Americans, Africans, whichever one. During his 1864 speech urging President Lincoln to consider the bill establishing the Freedmen's Bureau, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts referred to the race of the freedmen while reading the report from the American Freedmen's Inquiry Commission. Sumner read, quote, we need a Freedmen's Bureau, not because these people are Negroes, but because they are men who have been for generations despoiled of their rights. Now, as was stated in the definition of freedman in the Law Dictionary, the report of the American Freedmen's Inquiry Commission, as read by Sumner, identified the freedmen as being so-called Negroes, not white people. Again, keep in mind, we're trying to clarify this false thing about white freedmen. Special Field Orders number 15, issued by General William Tecumseh Sherman, 1865, acknowledges the race or color of the freedmen when he referred to them as, quote, Negroes now made free, and when he stated, quote, the blacks may remain in their chosen or accustomed vocations, end quote. Both Negro and black were employed by William Tecumseh Sherman in Special Field Orders number 15 in 1865, January 16th. The Port Royal Experiment. The South Carolina Encyclopedia's entry on the Port Royal Experiment not only mentions the freedmen by race or color, but it also speaks to how the former slaves were being referred to as freedmen in 1862 and 63, 3 years before the advent of the Freedmen's Bureau, thus demonstrating that the freedmen's status was not conferred by the 1865 Bureau, but was instead due to the acquisition of freedom. This seems very simple, but people seem to be having a problem with that. So let me read this from this entry. The Port Royal Experiment, also called the Sea Island Experiment, was an early humanitarian effort to prepare the former slaves of the South Carolina Sea Islands for inclusion as free citizens in an American public life. The Port Royal Experiment was made possible by the United States Navy's conquest of the Sea Islands of Beaufort District after the naval victory at the Battle of Port Royal, November 7, 1861. The islands remained in Union hands until the end of the war. The conquest was so swift that Beaufort District planters abandoned most of their property and hurriedly evacuated inland. Most importantly, nearly 10,000 slaves were abandoned on island plantations. Still not legally considered free, the abandoned slaves were declared, quote unquote, contraband of war. That's the entire term. I know some of these people are trying to call themselves contrabands or descendants of contrabands, but the entire term is contraband of war, and placed under the jurisdiction of the United States Department of the Treasury. So I wonder if the people who are descendants of contraband are under the jurisdiction of the United States Department of the Treasury. Nevertheless, Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase sent his friend Edward L. Pierce of Boston to Port Royal to recommend measures to the federal government for dealing with Sea Island, quote-unquote, contrabands. Reverend Mansfield French was dispatched to Port Royal at the same time as agent of the New York-based American Missionary Association to ascertain what help was needed for the Sea Island blacks, not whites. Both men arrived at Port Royal in 1862. The partnership between the federal government and various philanthropic agencies to carry out humanitarian enterprises among the Sea Island blacks continued throughout the war. Notable among their achievements was the establishment of private freedmen's schools that continued a century and a half after the Port Royal Experiment ended. The Mather School on Port Royal Island survived until the 1960s, and the Penn School on St. Helena Island continued into the 21st century as the Penn Community Center. Need y'all to pay attention. Contrabands, pay attention. Pay attention, contrabands. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation went into effect for the quote-unquote contrabands of the Sea Islands. Thereafter, they were freedmen and entitled to many rights and responsibilities as citizens. This was the pinnacle of the Port Royal Experiment and a day of jubilation for the Sea Island blacks. So I want y'all to, for the contrarians who are trying to figure out all kinds of other ways, particularly those calling themselves contrabands, I want you to pay particular attention to that. After the Emancipation Proclamation, they were freedmen, not contrabands. So we are not descendants of contrabands. We're descendants of the American freedmen and women. Following emancipation, another effort of the Port Royal Experiment was the redistribution of abandoned plantation lands to the former slaves. Under the authority of the United States Direct Tax Act of 1862, most of the Sea Island plantations in Beaufort District were seized for non-payment of taxes. Keep this in mind because it's going to come up again. Leaders of the Port Royal Experiment lobbied the federal government to distribute this land in small parcels to the freedmen, not to the contrabands, to the freedmen. On the one of the 101,930 acres seized, approximately 1/3 was purchased on favorable terms to the freedmen. Much of Beaufort County retained the character of small black landholding into the 21st century. So again, we see how the reference is made here to the race or color of the freedmen as being black and not white. This is for all of the confused black people in social media land. Also, the entry mentions the 1862 Direct Tax Act, which allowed the government to seize abandoned lands for non-payment of taxes and sell portions of it to the freedmen. Pay attention. Like I said, this is going to come up again in the 1866 Freedmen's Bureau Act, which we see on the screen here. Here's an image of this act. Section 6 of this particular federal legislation mentions the race of the freedmen in the text, as well as the annotations on pages 174 through 175. As we can see here on the left of the screen, you'll see the annotations. This is page 174. The race of the freedmen is mentioned as the African race. I know a lot of y'all don't like that. I understand what's going on social media with the diaspora wars, but we're trying to show people how the United States government acknowledged our people by race and or color. And African was one of the terminologies that was used, and we're going to see this again come up. On page 175, the race of the freedmen is mentioned twice as, quote, the African race, as we see highlighted in yellow here. The African race. I've stated on several occasions that our families were referred to in this country and by the Supreme Court using at least 4 race names, those being the African race, the black race, the colored race, and the Negro race. This was demonstrated in the Supreme Court case of Dred Scott. Now, these are four screenshots from that case showing 4 racial designations for the same group of people. We were even called people of color in that case. I didn't screenshot that one, but that was also used. So let's read from the top left about the African race. It says here, a free Negro of the African race whose ancestors were brought to this country and sold as slaves is not a quote unquote citizen within the meaning of the Constitution of the United States. Go to the top right. The unhappy black race was separated from the white by indelible marks and laws long before established and were never thought of or spoken of except as property and when the claims of the owner or the profit of the trader were supposed to need protection. Let's go to the bottom left. Our independence was a great epoch in the history of freedom. And while I admit the government was not made especially for the colored race, yet many of them were citizens of the New England states and exercised the rights of suffrage when the Constitution was adopted, and it was not doubted by any intelligent person that its tendencies would greatly ameliorate their condition. Now, to the bottom right, they perfectly understood the meaning of the language they used and how it would be understood by others. And they knew that it would not in any part of the civilized world be supposed to embrace the Negro race, which by common consent had been excluded from civilized governments, and from the families of nations and doomed to slavery. All 4 race names, African race, black race, colored race, Negro race, were employed in the same Supreme Court case, referring to the same group of Americans. Let's move. Section 5 of the Act to incorporate the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Bank tells us that the bank was for those, quote, heretofore held in slavery in the United States or their descendants. The people who were heretofore or theretofore held in slavery and their descendants, who are also members of the freedmen class, were and are categorized in government records as members of the so-called African race, black race, colored race, or Negro race, as we just saw in the Dred Scott case. Almost 60 years after the 13th Amendment's adoption. Volume 27 of the Corpus Juris on page 895, published in 1922, provides the legal context of the term freedmen as being one which refers to, not referred to, but refers to that class of persons and their descendants who were emancipated during the war between the American states. Now, if anybody thinks that the word descendant is limited in scope, I'd like to see the legal proof of that. Otherwise, descendant means descendant, and by definition, we today as descendants are included in the freedmen class. Now let's look at footnote 30, number 32, because keep in mind, we're clarifying the race or color of the freedmen class in the United States, as well as whether or not we are members of that class today. In this footnote, Fairfield versus Lawson is cited as well as the Alabama Supreme Court case of Jeffries versus State. The terms freedmen and freedwomen in volume 13 of the South Carolina statutes, the Black Codes, defining persons of color as including all freedmen and all freedwomen and all descendants through either sex of any of these persons, must be regarded as indicating a class which had been in slavery. So people of the freedmen class in the United States bear the status as members of said class and have been racially categorized in courts and in acts of legislation as persons of color, Black, Negro, and African. And yes, I'm going to keep saying African because African, as was shown in the 1866 Freedmen's Bureau Act and in the 1857 Dred Scott Supreme Court case, was absolutely employed by this government. Here's a portion of the opinion from the case cited in the corpus juris of the previous slide. Not to get into the merits of this case, but I just want to point out something for those who think freedmen doesn't describe the status of a people. The opinion of this case specifically says that, quote, the term freedmen is descriptive of the status of the defendants, end quote. They have the word status italicized, and there are a number of reasons why a word would be italicized. One is to draw extra attention to the word or the phrase, and another is to show that there's some deeper meaning to the word or phrase, such as an insinuation or some double entendre or something of that sort. Now, here's another screenshot. This is from the Mississippi Black Codes. I could have just used this excerpt alone to debunk the myth of the white freedman. But what I wanted to do was provide a number of judicial and legislative sources so that the point is driven home for those being obtuse and trying to confuse others on social media. In this excerpt from the Mississippi Black Codes of 1865, there's a clear demarcation outlined between freedmen and white people. Let's see. Quote, it shall not be lawful for any freedman, free Negro, or mulatto to intermarry with any white person, nor for any white person to intermarry with any freedman, free Negro, or mulatto, and any person who shall so intermarry shall be deemed guilty of felony, and on conviction thereof shall be confined in the state penitentiary for life. So here we see, via anti-miscegenation and racial purity, the line was clearly drawn between whites and freedmen. And Mississippi is not the only state to enact such laws. Let's move. Walter Raleigh Vaughan had a freedmen's pension bill introduced into Congress in 1890 by the United States House Representative William J. Connell of Nebraska. In 1891, he published a pamphlet entitled Freedmen's Pension Bill, a Plea for American Freedmen. Now, on the title page, he makes mention of the color or racial categorization of the American freedmen when stating that his bill and pamphlet contained a rational proposition to grant pensions to persons of color emancipated from slavery. In the bill itself, the race or color of the American freedman is implicated via the usage of proxy words and phrases where it states, quote, persons once held as slaves or involuntary subjects in consequence of race or color, end quote. This is not language used for those racially categorized as white in the United States, but it is used of those categorized as blacks who were enslaved and emancipated in the United States. Title 8, United States Code, Chapter 4 is entitled Freedmen, Federal Legislative Statutory Recognition of Freedmen. Sections 61 through 65 of Chapter 4 has been omitted from the published code as these sections were deemed obsolete. However, law that has been omitted from the United States Code still has legal force. For example, in the 1993 case of United States National Bank of Oregon versus Independent Insurance Agents of America, the Supreme Court ruled that Title 12 of the United States Code, Section 92, was still valid law, even though it had been omitted from the United States Code for decades. Let's move. Nevertheless, the primary point is in showing legislative and judicial recognition of freedmen and the benefits of freedmen's status to the heirs of the emancipated. Title 8 United States Code, Chapter 4, Section 61 reads this: all laws and parts of laws pertaining to the collection and payment of bounty, prize money, and other legitimate claims of colored soldiers, sailors, and Marines or their heirs shall remain in force until otherwise ordered by Congress. We have all sections 61 through 65 of the Freedmen's Chapter, which has been omitted from the United States Code. So if anyone wants to read it, you can hit us up, or you can research it and try to find it yourself. The Freedmen, right here, we see the Freedman from 1864. This was a newspaper published by the American Tract Society of Boston starting in 1864, 1 year before the founding of the Freedmen's Bureau. Their very first publication included an entry called, quote, Instruction for the Freedmen. One excerpt reads, quote, God has wrought workers in behalf of the colored people of this land. He has seen all the wrongs they have suffered. He has heard all their prayers, and in his own time has come down to rebuke their oppressors and open the door of deliverance. He's also sending them teachers with schools and books that we may learn to read God's word and become wise unto salvation. So there they mentioned the people as colored. There's several other newspapers, pamphlets, journals, periodicals, etc., that speak about the color or racial categorization of the freedmen, but we really don't need to go any further into those, although if it becomes necessary, we can do that. Now, I've been speaking, hold on 1 second, y'all. Hold on. Let me just make sure we're on the right screenshot. I've been speaking about what a person categorized as white can't be. But let's start talking about what they can be. Every person, including so-called white people, are in fact descendants of human beings who came before them. They most definitely can be descendants of slaves, and using the ADOS language and understanding, they can be American descendants of slavery. They can be descendants of freed men and freed women. However, persons categorized as white are not members of the freedmen class. Let's get into why a white person may be an American descendant of slavery, yet not a member of the American freedmen class in the United States. And to do that, we have to deal with logic and reason. Slavery is an institution that included both the enslaved and the enslaver. The truth is, no human being descends from slavery because descendancy is a matter of biology and consanguinity. Human beings descend from other human beings, not from institutions. So when properly understood, you see that the terminology slavery's descendants is erroneous on its face. I don't believe that our families should be using this terminology, although people are obviously free to do as they please, just as routers did with this title of their examination and report, Slavery's Descendants, which we see on the screen. Nevertheless, because people don't consider what's being said here, you have white people in organizations like routers using the same terminology to identify the descendants of the other side of that institution, and they are the descendants of slave owners, i.e. American descendants of slavery as well. Now, everybody keeps talking about, specificity and delineation. Well, try identifying the American descendants of slavery who's owed reparations without using race. Let's see if that can be done. Who are the descendants of slavery that Routers was referring to? In researching the genealogies of America's political elite, a Routers examination found that a fifth of the members of Congress, living presidents, Supreme Court justices, and governors are direct descendants of ancestors who enslaved Black people. Among 536 members of the last sitting Congress, for example, Routers determined at least 100 descend from slave owners. Of that group, more than a quarter of the Senate, 28 members, can trace their families to at least one slaveholder. Among those lawmakers from the 117th Congress are Democrats and Republicans alike. They include some of the most influential politicians in America: Republican Senators Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, and Democrats Elizabeth Warren, Tammy Duckworth, and Jeanne Shaheen. In addition, Routers determined that President Joe Biden and every living former United States president except Donald Trump are direct descendants of slaveholders: Jimmy Carter, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and through his white mother's side, Barack Obama. Two of the 9 sitting United States Supreme Court justices, Amy Coney Barrett and Neil Gorsuch, also have direct ancestors who enslaved people. These are American descendants of slavery who are racially categorized as white. Now, to further expound on how a person categorized as white can most certainly be considered an American descendant of slavery, but not be a member of the freedmen class in the United States, we must go into what whiteness is and how it functions. According to the research of Theodore W. Allen in his 2-volume set, The Invention of the White Race, whiteness was invented during the American colonial period of the 1600s as a social control mechanism and a tool used to oppress non-Europeans. A racial hierarchy was created where the descendants of Europe were placed at the top and the descendants of Africa at the bottom. NPR published an article in 2014 called "A Chosen Exile: Black People Passing in White America." They show an image of a family who we can see phenotypically are clearly of mixed ancestry, but would be seen socially and legally as Black, colored, or Negro. So why would anyone want to pass as white in the United States? The answer to that very important question goes to explain why a person categorized as white cannot be a member of the freedmen class. Let's go. Kellogg Insight for the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University published a report 2021 called "To Escape Jim Crow Era Discrimination and Violence. Some Black Men Passed as White, but How Many?" It goes on to answer hundreds of thousands according to a new study of census data. Doing so provided some economic benefits, but came at a great personal cost. Yes, it came at a great personal cost because they had to sever ties with family and friends and other loved ones. An important excerpt reads this: "The motivation for why Black men might have wanted to pass is painfully understandable. From 1877 to 1950, white supremacists lynched more than 4,000 Black people in the South. Those who managed to avoid violence were blocked from better schools or higher ranking jobs because of their race, their Black race, their Negro race, their colored race, their African race, not because they were white. When they did get jobs, Black employees were paid less than white peers. and interracial marriage was illegal in many states. These restrictions left Black people with few, if any, options for escaping the confines of a racist system. You can't work your way out of it. You can't study your way out of it. You can't marry your way out of it, 𝐷𝐿𝐄𝐿 says, which for some left the option of trying to pass. The point is, a person categorized as white cannot be a member of the freedmen class in the United States, because those of us of the freedmen class have inherited what's called the stain of slavery. In Rome, it was called macula servitutis, whereas whiteness erases that stain, thus the reason for people attempting to pass. This is why I wanted to speak about passing for white, because those people who did it did so to erase the stain of slavery from their person. Here's a pertinent excerpt from historian Kerry Lee Merritt, PhD, in her 2016 entry for the African American Intellectual History Society. Thus, by essentially giving away land to white individuals and white-owned businesses, the Homestead Acts were the most extensive, radical, redistributive governmental policy in American history. The number of original 1862 Homestead recipient descendants living in the year 2000 was estimated to be around 46 million people, about a quarter of the United States population. Now, as sociologist Thomas Shapiro pointed out, if so many white Americans could potentially trace their legacy of property ownership to these entitlement programs, modern day issues like upward mobility, economic stability, class status, and wealth need to be understood as directly related to one national policy, a policy that in practice essentially excluded African Americans. With the advent of emancipation, therefore, Blacks became the only race in America ever to start out as an entire people with close to zero wealth and with no saved inheritable wealth and assets. Loans were nearly impossible to secure. Homelessness and hardship were only one illness, one accident, or one bad crop away. Having nothing else upon which to build or generate wealth, the majority of freedmen had little real chance of breaking the cycles of poverty created by slavery and perpetuated by federal policy. The stain of slavery, it seems, is much more widespread and lasting than many scholars have admitted. Yet it is the legacy of Reconstruction, particularly the failure of land redistribution, that so closely coupled poverty and race in America. The conversation over the United States' extreme and growing inequality is long overdue, and it is morally imperative that race is a central part of that dialogue. So what Dr. Merritt does here is use historical facts to demonstrate how whiteness functions as a shield against this stain of slavery. Again, the members of the freedmen class possess the stain of slavery, and those categorized as white are protected by whiteness from that stain. A novel published in 1929 by Nella Larson called Passing tells the story of a person of freedmen ancestry passing as white for the purpose of essentially erasing the stain of slavery from her person. What becomes apparent in all of this is that slavery's stain has been perpetuated through two main mediums. The first being phenotype, a person's physical appearance, features like dark skin, broad nose, thick lips, woolly hair. The second medium is through nomenclature, names. The colorized racial classifications generally associated with people of said phenotype, Black, African, whatever, are used to identify and group them together in society as those who have been marked or stained by slavery. It's not white people. Years ago, the knowledge of an individual's ancestry would have also been used to identify persons marked or stained by slavery. For example, Homer Plessy, being a so-called mulatto of mixed descent in the proportion of 7/8 Caucasian and 1/8 African blood, was relegated to the African, Black, colored, or Negro race by the United States Supreme Court. In the lone dissent, Kentuckian Justice John Marshall Harlan argued that Jim Crow laws were mischievous and sinister, and that the enactment of such laws would place a large body of American citizens in a condition of legal inferiority. That's not white people. The American freedmen families, relegated to the African, black, colored, or Negro race, were forced into that condition of legal inferiority. These are the particular Americans who bear the stain of slavery. So, to conclude the point of this alleged white freedmen thing, there are no so-called white people with the status of belonging to the freedmen class in the United States due to the purpose and functionality of whiteness, in essence, white privilege. It's very simple. Now, here we see the Bouvier's Law Dictionary. Now, I'm almost finished. Only got a couple of slides and then we're done. The Bouvier's Law Dictionary, published in 1892, referring to Roman law, as did the Black's Law Dictionary, but also referring to the word libertine. So let's examine this Roman or Latin word, libertine. Now, a great question is this: why the consistent reference to Roman law when dealing with American legal concepts? Well, Roman law has specifically affected jurisprudential thought in America. The preeminent historian of this topic, Dean Michael Hoflich, has concluded that there was a moment in the Anglo-American legal world when Roman and civil law exercised a particular attraction to jurists and theoreticians. It influenced the thinking of many important legal theorists and jurists in the 19th century, i.e. the 1800s, which is of particular interest to us with the advent of the freedmen terminology in the 1860s, as was used in Rome, hence the continued references to Rome. So a great explanation of the term libertine, which is Latin for freedman, was provided in the book called On the Social Standing of Freedmen as Indicated in the Latin Writers by John Jackson Crumley, published in 1904. It discusses the use and meaning of the words libertus and libertinus, the plural of libertine or freedman in Rome. Let me just read this. During our Civil War, there was created in connection with the War Department of the United States government a Freedmen's Bureau. The object of this bureau was to aid the freedmen of the southern states. At the time of the organization of this bureau, there were Negroes, not whites, Negroes in the southern states who were not ex-slaves, and yet they came under the protection of this bureau. There is an operation at the present time in this country, a fund known as the John Slater Fund for the Education of Freedmen. It is well known that this fund, even from its foundation, aided freeborn descendants of freedmen as well as freedmen themselves. Pay attention to this last sentence. The use of the word freedman in these two instances is a parallel to the use of libertinus, freedmen, among the Romans. So there are two key points being raised here. Number one, that so-called Negroes of the southern states who were not ex-slaves at the time of the Freedmen's Bureau organization also came under the Bureau's protection. And number two, that the John Slater Educational Fund for Freedmen aided freeborn descendants of freedmen as well as freedmen themselves. This demonstrates that the freedmen's status, aid, benefit, and protections extended to the descendants of the manumitted or the emancipated. Go a little further. From the same book, from the passages quoted above, it's evident that libertinus must include men that were once slaves. We also seen that there were places where the writers in the use of this word seem to have had in mind the descendants of the freedmen as well as the manumissi or the manumitted. We must therefore attribute to the word a meaning that will cover both of these conditions. This offers, however, no particular difficulty. On the other hand, it is the most natural meaning that the derivation of the word would indicate. We have seen above that its adjectival suffix gives the word the meaning of pertaining to or belonging to the class of freedmen. This meaning very clearly fulfills both of the above requirements. This is the context. So now that we have more context about this terminology, let's look at this again. The term is frequently applied to the emancipated slaves in the southern states. By the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, citizenship was conferred upon them. The 15th Amendment protects the elective franchise of freedmen and others of African descent, and this was the object of its adoption. So the word libertine, as used by the Bouvier's Law Dictionary, is telling you that this is dealing with people who were of African descent that were also the descendants of the emancipated, though they may have been freeborn. So I'll end with this. This is an excerpt from the so-called cornerstone speech of Vice President Alexander Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy. He makes a very important point about who the subordinate race is on March 21st, 1861, just before the Civil War actually starts. It says this: many governments have been founded upon the principle of the subordination and serfdom of certain classes of the same race. Such were and are in violation of the laws of nature. Our system commits no such violation of nature's laws. With us, all of the white race, however high or low, rich or poor, are equal in the eye of the law. Not so with the Negro. Subordination is his place. He, by nature or by the curse against Canaan, is fitted for that condition which he occupies in our system, which they refer to as the substratum of our society. Now, in conclusion, at various points in this speech, Stephens refers to the enslaved subordinate race as African, as Black, and also as Negro, as we've seen even with this particular excerpt on the screen. The enslaved subordinate race are the same people who were emancipated in 1863 through 65 from there known as freedmen. The truth that we at Be the Power and the United Sons and Daughters of Freedmen proffer is that those emancipated persons and their African American, Black, colored, or Negro descendants comprise the American freedmen and thus possess the status of belonging to this particular class of freedmen in the United States. And with that, in the presentation.
Man, that was a powerful, powerful discussion. Well, presentation, excuse me. And there were so many different aspects that thoroughly, in the very beginning, that thoroughly debunked the pseudology that is being spread by obstructionists and detractors. And that is that there is a such thing as white freedmen. And you made so many great points, and we could start with the last one. If Alexander Stephens, the Vice President of the Confederacy, is saying that subordination is the natural state of the Negro and not the white race, it is then impossible for white legislators to look at themselves, number one, and look at the people that look like them as slaves, as people worthy of subordination. I mean, it's just as clear as day, and it shows that people are not invested in the research. They're not invested in any of the information. Many have their own ulterior motives in this particular space. Many are just hateful obstructionists that wish that we fell so that a pseudo ideology like pretendianism, for instance, can somehow prevail when they can't even prove that they are who they say that they are. Others have flip-flopped all on the issue. One minute they're promoting freedmen, the next minute they're dissing it and saying that freedmen agencies is symbolic and all of this other stuff. But what we see here is, you know, an excellent presentation. And, you know, the family is in the chat giving you salutes as well.
Thank you. Thanks to the family. I appreciate that.
And I want, man, what was the other point I wanted to bring up? There was something that you brought up earlier. I had a list of things in my brain, but I just got distracted real quick because I wanted to show all of the comments. And I do want to say real quick, we have almost 300 people watching live. Most of you all are on Twitter right now. Come to the Freedmen University channel on YouTube. Click the subscribe button. Click like on the video on YouTube. Or we can put this video in the algorithm. Because the fact of the fact of the matter is, you know, ain't like Ibrahim said, every 40 days BTP goes to the mountain and they start worshiping the golden calf. And that's just the fact. It's just the fact. And we try to stay consistent. We're also working behind the scenes on several things as well. And it's political season. But you will start seeing more live streams coming from us. This channel, the Freedmen University channel, is going to be dedicated to lectures like you just saw. There are college professors, professors of universities that could not have given a breakdown in the way that brother Ali just gave. And that's just a fact. That's a fact. You know, and I'm not saying that due to my own personal bias. I'm saying that because for the most part, we've examined the works of certain individuals, like this one professor from Howard University I've been going back and forth with all day, our good friend Ali.
Yeah, that was Scott. He left Howard. He's over at Delaware State now.
Oh, he left Howard. Okay.
Yeah,
There's just something about Howard, man. They be producing some folk, I tell you. But yeah, man. So, you know, I'm trying to remember. It was this one point I wanted to hit on, but I'm gonna let you kind of give a summary and a recap of what you broke down to the people who are listening in right now.
Well, you know, here's the thing in a nutshell. In order for there to have been white freedmen, you had to have white slaves, because the terminology freedmen, again, the context is really important. And a lot of times people are throwing around things. You know, they see certain words and like, you know, and they're looking for this aha, gotcha moment. Like, yeah, see, it says white freedmen right there. You see that? But they're not really even, you know, reading or researching the stuff. You know, just like some of the screenshots we saw, is basically they were throwing up things that actually was just typos, right? Because when you examine, you go further into what it was referencing, you see that those terminologies are not actually being used at all. It was some kind of a typo or some error in the in whatever news source that they were using. But again, like I said, those news sources are not sources of legal authority. And so when it comes to freedmen as a legal, political, constitutional status and class of people, you got to go to the laws pertaining to that. You can't just look at news articles. What are the governing laws? What did the laws say? What did the federal government say about who the freedmen were? What did the state and local governments say about who the freedmen were? That's how you determine this thing. You don't look at some book written by some white dude in 1913 who's just using the term without any references or sources that you can cross-reference to say, look, this is what they were doing during this is what the colonial government said about these people. There's no proof that the colonial governments ever used that term to refer to any of these white bond servants once they were released. So that's the whole thing. I was like, well, people are not really digging into it. They're just they're looking for gotcha moments. Aha, got you. See, that's that. You see that word right there? See, you say white freedmen, and it's like, whatever, man. Whatever. But I mean, you know, this is the kind of thing that we've been dealing with for damn near probably the past 20 years. It's just the lack of context, the lack of actually digging into the stuff that you're reading. Like they're not truly reading these things, so they don't really understand what it's actually saying or even the reference, like what it is referring to. You know what I mean? And so it's just off. It's, you know, it's a lot of stuff like that, man, and just exposing that for what it actually is.
Indeed. And one of the things that you brought out for the first time to the public, you know, we be sitting on we be sitting on some information, family. Was the Alabama case, and that Alabama case is deep. I'm trying to remember the specific quote, but it says something to the effect of when it comes to the term freedman, clearly it states that it is a status, and it says that it has legal signification.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
that's right. So those things don't just change. Now, you may, over the course of 100 years, forget about those things if they're not written about anymore. But like we've asked people, we've asked professors who have tried to challenge us on this topic, and no matter how many times we prove them wrong, we ask them one simple question: when did we stop becoming freedmen?
Stop being.
Excuse me. When did we stop being freedmen? And they could never answer the question. And we would juxtapose that question with the fact that you have Chickasaw freedmen today, Choctaw freedmen today, Seminole freedmen today. But for whatever reason, that part of it, they turn a blind eye to it. It's like, I'll accept those people as being exotic, if you will, but I will not accept us as being the same. I will only accept us through really the limited view of, I'm going to just say, racist white academia, which has become standard in how we are viewed as a people. And I'll say real quick, right? When doing, rather researching the points out of books like The Second Founding by Eric Foner, or The Original Meaning of the 14th Amendment. There's several authors, I can never remember their names. They speak to the Dunning school of thought. And I think that it is important for us to make a comparative statement with how academia and the so-called smart people see us today, based on how the Dunning School created a cookie cutter standardized view of how we are viewed in the eyes of the law, and how through construction, judicial construction of the Reconstruction Amendment and the subsequent acts like the 1866 Civil Rights Act, etc., the construction limited in some or in one aspect, and in another aspect, it redesigned the intent. And I think a lot of people are stuck on the rigors of their scholastic methodology coming from these universities and these colleges, and they blind themselves to the obvious facts. That there's a big word for that. That's called obstinate. A lot of these guys is obstinate, Brother Ali. So, what is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. A lot of people are obstinate, and just even looking at some of the comments, just responding to one where somebody was saying that there was an attorney that they were speaking to, who says that it's not a political it's not a political class. But as I just said, all attorneys don't know all things. Attorneys often, they're specialized in certain areas, and most of these attorneys that you're speaking to are not constitutional specialists in constitutional law. They're not specialists in the Reconstruction era history, or none of that stuff like that. So I don't even know what area of law this particular person practices. So you have to really see, when you're looking for certain things, you have to go to the people and go to the places where this stuff exists, right? So for instance, think about it like this. You have doctors who specialize in certain areas, right? And so if you have a kidney issue, you're going to go to a kidney doctor, right? Not a general practitioner. You want to go to a kidney doctor, somebody who specializes in that particular thing. If you have a heart issue, you want to go to a cardiologist, not just a general practitioner. You want to go to a cardiologist, someone who specializes in that area. So when it comes to issues of constitution, when it comes to the issue of Reconstruction, the Reconstruction Amendments, what all of this stuff means and how it relates to us today, from a constitutional perspective, from a political and legal perspective, you got to go to those that are specialized in that particular area. You follow what I'm saying? You know, it's just, you know, we can't go to people who deal in contract law and entertainment law, and then, you know, some entertainment attorney tells you, you know, that's not how that works. In environmental law, yeah, he says he clearly he teaches environmental law. Exactly. Right. So that's his area of expertise, environmental law. What you need to do is you would need to go to a constitutional law professor, someone of that ilk. You know, you would need to go to the historians who specialize in that area of American history, because it's a very significant area of American history that has been neglected for many years, particularly in the public school system. They don't really the Reconstruction period is a part of American history that they deliberately neglect, because they know that that part of American history is where everything that is significant to us is going to come from. They know that. So it's like we got to ignore that part of it. Ignore that part of it. So they'll skip right from slavery and jump right into the civil rights era and skip all of that stuff in between, because that's just, you know, it's too important of a period of time, and you can draw too much inspiration from that. That's where that's where Callie House's movement is rooted, in the Reconstruction. I mean, back in that time period. You see what I'm saying? So that's where the special field orders is rooted, in that time period. That's where the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments is rooted, in that time period. Specifically the 13th Amendment, which is of significant importance to us as we're moving forward as reparationists who are looking for the eradication, right, of all of the badges and incidents of slavery that has been causing us generational harms in this country. So that's the thing. An environmentalist attorney is not someone that we would need to speak to. We would need to speak to someone who actually specializes in that area that we're interested in. Okay, and the term Negro freedman. Well, it's just like it's like anything else. It's when Europeans or so-called white people use terminology like that, you'll see Negro freedmen, you'll see Black freedmen, things of that nature. What they're doing is they're applying the race to the people, right? They're applying the race to the people. And it's just, I think it's a habit of theirs, because ultimately what they wind up doing is dropping the use of the term freedman and just going with Negro and Black and colored, etc. So if you might see something like a colored freedman or Black freedman or the Negro freedman, etc. But then over time, they just say Blacks or African Americans. They stop using the term freedman altogether. You know what I mean? So the point of it is, and this is a thing to keep in mind with regard to that, Negro freedmen does not denote that they were white freedmen. It just that's the way Europeans refer to us. They have a habit of using race. Everything for them revolves around race, because they put their trust in certain names and certain principles. So they put their trust in race, right? And the reason that they put their trust in race is because race has worked well for them. It's very beneficial to use race for them, because remember, like I said in the very beginning, whiteness was created as a tool of oppression during the colonial period. And whiteness operates to shield those who are categorized as such from the problems of society that we face, that we are doomed to face. Like I said, this race is doomed to the status that they occupy in society, the so-called Negro, right? So that's what it comes down to. You know, they have a habit of using race to describe us at all turns, even though at the same time they tell you that the use of such terminology is actually considered unconstitutional, right? Because using that type of terminology does not advance the so-called colorblind constitution and colorblind society that the Constitution looks to create, that they consistently talk about. Even in the last Supreme Court, the affirmative action Supreme Court case, they're telling you all of this race conscious, race-based stuff is unconstitutional. Yet and still, it's the government who are the ones who are perpetuating this through the Office of Management and Budget, as well as the United States Census Bureau. You see what I'm saying? So they're operating from a place of hypocrisy and contradiction. That's actually what's happening. They want to always relegate us to race because race has worked very well for them.
It represents a hierarchy.
Absolutely.
This is why they don't abandon it. You know how we spell white, WIGHT. And we get the European American, which I believe is a proper designation, always coming at me saying, you're spelling white wrong. I'll say, no, I'm spelling it correctly. They're offended by it. And the reason why they're offended by it is because they know that I'm using the word based on the meaning of WIGHT as opposed to, that Malcolm X scene where whiteness represents everything pure and cloudy and cottony and pure as the driven snowish. Well, what I'm saying is I don't acknowledge that. Hence the reason why we spell it WIGHT. We don't acknowledge whiteness. We don't acknowledge blackness. We don't acknowledge redness. We don't acknowledge yellowness. This is a color-coded system that these pale-skinned Europeans created so that they can place themselves at the top of the pyramid of human existence. The great chain of being is what they called it. So, yes, when you hear terms like Negro freedmen, it isn't to imply that there were other freedmen, because there weren't. And we know that for a fact. It is, as Ali said, they must relegate us to this racial or these racial names that they've given us, because they know that these are names that allude to slavery. So although I'm going to call you a freedman, I'm going to recognize that you are still limited. What did Abraham Lincoln said? Go anywhere in the country and the ban will still be on you. I couldn't do anything about it if I tried. I paraphrase. So, that's why you'll see that terminology. What did Lincoln say? If not for the black freedmen, the war against the South would have surely been lost, or something to that effect.
Yep. The war against the South could not have been won.
Could not have been won. That's right.
See that? I put an image of how they break that hierarchy down. You see what I'm saying? And like you said, bro, that does absolutely come from, it starts with the great chain of being. That's where it comes from. The great chain of being is what influences the colorized racial hierarchy and classification that becomes the classification system we use in the United States. But basically, Europeans named everything and everybody. This is how bad it is. We always talking about black and white in America, or yellow, calling Asian people yellow, calling Native Americans red man, other people brown. But they named everything and everybody. Like, the people of the Asian continent didn't name that place Asia. We were just talking about this the other day. The people of the African continent didn't name that continent Africa. They didn't even name the countries the names that they have. All that stuff comes from Europeans. This place being called America, it came from Europeans. The word America itself is of Latin construction. Yeah, at the root of it, we have sources that speak about the fact that they use one of the names of one of the native groups of people here, the Amari or Maru people, and added the Ika or the ICA or CA to it. Right, but the ICA is a Roman suffix. That means land or land of. So you see that in America, you see it in Africa, right? You see it in Antarctica, right? They named all of these places on their maps, right? These cartographers, they named these places. They named the place Africa. They named the place Europe. They named the place Asia. They named the place America. And then called the people of America Indians, and called the people of Africa Ethiopians and Africans and niggers. And then decided to call themselves white. They named everything and everybody. They called the people of the East, they called them Orientals. They did that. Those people didn't call themselves Orientals. That's why they said you change that. They didn't even call themselves Asian. They just think Asian is more politically correct. But these people
like
went
the
around
term Orientals.
Exactly. Well, yeah, the Orient means the East, right? Don't it mean the East?
And it was always only applied insofar as identifying peoples. I don't want to say only, because in early academia, Oriental, just like Asiatic, could really include anybody from the East. But in the American sense, right, the Occidental scholarship of the United States of America, Oriental in their racial classification system was confined to Chinese, Japanese, North or South Koreans. Now Asian is a broad term. So you could have, let's just say, Black Hispanics. And in the United States of America, they will fall under the category of Hispanic.
Right.
They may check a racial box.
Yep.
Yeah, they may check a racial box, but they still fall under this broad category of Hispanic. And because of such, the United States of America makes us believe that we are somehow the minority here, when in fact we are the largest ethnic group in the United States of America, that being the American freedmen. You dismiss the fictitious racial terminology that's used in this country, and that becomes clear. It becomes very, very clear that if you lump us together as a race, and this should be something that people research and expose, because it was exposed in that Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case last year that killed the diversity rationale of affirmative action. People, they don't know about the case, and they believe that affirmative action is now dead for the American freedmen, when it's not. And some people have pointed to, oh, the numbers of enrollees in these PWIs are lower since the affirmative action case. Yeah, but on the flip side of that, and there's two flip sides. The flip side of that, enrollment at HBCUs is higher. That's one. And then I can flesh that out a little bit more and say we were so used to using racial rationale for admission under affirmative action that we forgot about freedmen rationale. We get back into that status thing, right? And the other flip side is that it worked against the Asian group, the Orientals, that was bringing the case, being used by the white supremacists, Edward Bloom, et cetera, because it's just been reported a few days ago that Asian admissions into PWIs has dipped since the affirmative action ruling as well. So, we have, I don't know, man. I don't know, Ali. Sometimes it feels like we're talking into the void and nobody's listening, because everybody's trying to go their own way with with what's clear. As insofar as moving together collectively wise. I mean, even the case, you brought up tonight, for many, this was their first time seeing that Alabama Supreme Court case that spoke to the legal signification of freedmen's status. I mean, it uses it plainly in the text that this is a status. Kavanaugh acknowledges this in 2022 during the oral hearings of that aforementioned case, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard and, by extension, the University of North Carolina. So, I don't understand why people get led all the way up to the water and then they turn around and go the other way.
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, bro. I mean, you can't control folks, man, but the only thing we can do, I guess, is to try to continue to give some clarity on our positions and why we take the positions that we do. People can do what they want, take that and do what you want with it, but we'll provide clarity. That's the whole point. Is to try to provide some form of clarity and a sense of direction for how we can maneuver around some of the obstacles that have been put in place. Because you got to understand, when what we're actually trying to address is the issue of remedial justice, reparative justice, reparations, and we're trying to address this in a way that makes it actually doable and can include an actual group or class of people without dealing with the issue of race. Not saying that race is not going to come up even with the Freedmen thing, because I'm sure somebody, if we was ever to even get to the point of going to the Supreme Court over it, that's way down the line. But if we ever even got to that point, somebody would try to argue that Freedmen is a racial terminology. You better believe it. They would try to make that argument. It just so happens that we have this particular Supreme Court case, or the affirmative action case, that we can use as a reference point to say, well, the Supreme Court and some of the language of that case says something completely different about that. You know what I mean? So, it's just a way for us to try to maneuver around some of the pitfalls. And one of those main pitfalls is absolutely the issue of the matter of race and racial classifications, and attempting to do legislative work on behalf of some racial group. Well, and I know Black Americans on social media feel like it's an ethnic group, but they view Black as the government, and I understand the way people on Twitter view it. They view it as an ethnicity, Black American, but the United States government views it as a race, and that hasn't changed. As far as I know, it hasn't changed in race and ethnicity. It's not just ethnicity. Race and ethnicity are considered suspect classifications. So it's something to truly think about if you're going to really try to move forward in a serious way with knowledge of these particular obstacles in mind. You got to keep those in mind and try to mitigate that stuff, or you just gonna walk right into it, like we see what happened in Evanston. Evanston is going to give you your answer. When they come back with their ruling, it's going to give you the answer as to where this thing is going with regard to the issue of race, whether or not you can use it. I already have my prediction on where that's going to go, right? And they may try to appeal a ruling, because it is a lower court, and they may try to appeal that ruling and take it to the Supreme Court. But even if they do go to the Supreme Court, based on what happened in the affirmative action case, we already kind of can see where it would go. So I'm just saying, we should, those of us who know certain things should act like we know certain things, as opposed to feigning ignorance and trying to placate and play to and appease other people who don't know what we know. You follow what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to appease anybody because they stuck on Black American. Yeah, all right, cool. That's your thing. I don't mind. But I'm not going to play the appeasement thing. I'm not going to play that appeasement game with y'all on that. I'm not going to do that, because I know better, right? So when you know better, you do better. You act like you know. When you know, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what a responsible person does. That's all I'm saying. So people are free, they're grown, they can do what they want to do with whatever information they have. And I'm just saying our job, as far as I'm concerned, is to always try to provide clarity and some sense of direction in terms of where we can go and how we can maneuver around some of the pitfalls.
Exactly, man. You know, we've been saying this for the longest, and you know, people will sell out they think they're doing it something significant, but they're not. On the Twitter space, if you were to look at them and put them like in a broader position to reach the people, they would sell us all out for a morsel of bread. They would throw away that Freedman name for a morsel of bread. And that's a fact. That's a fact. We see them do it all the time for the sake of engagement, and they understand what it is. They know, you know, these racial classification.
I'm not playing the descendant game. I'm not playing the Black American game. I'm not playing the African American game. I understand all of those terminologies. I understand their usage and what they mean and why people use them. But like I said, I personally know better. We personally know better. So I'm not even going into that with people. I'm not doing the Negro thing, right? You know, it is what it is. Y'all can do what y'all want to do. But again, we're trying to provide information that we believe will be useful and you know, in the future. And that's just it. Like we at some point we're gonna have to come to terms with the fact that we're not gonna be able to use race to our benefit. Right? There's nothing in the history of our relationship to the United States and our relationship to white people in the United States that suggests that we can use race to our benefit. There's nothing to suggest that. There is no precedent there for anything like that. To say, yeah, you can use some race or some racial categorization for legislative and judicial purposes for your benefit as a group. There's nothing. There's nothing that proves that. So it's like I'm like, why should we've been in this country since its founding, since 1776. It's 2024, and from this time of the founding of this country until now, there is absolutely nothing that says, hey, you guys can use race. And here, see, you used race in the past at this point, and see how beneficial it was for you guys politically, economically, socially, right? Look at how using race actually benefited you guys. Now, it benefits white people to use race. That's why they consistently do it. But it is always to our detriment. The use of it is always to our detriment. So I'm just saying, you know, do what you will, but you know, I'm not playing that. I'm not here to do race work, and I'm not here to play race games and argue about race and whether or not black is this and who's like, that's for you guys. I'm not doing that.
Indeed. And you know, let me know when you want to wrap it up, bro.
I'm good, bro. I think that was pretty much it. You know, I just wanted to get that out.
Definitely. And I just want to stick with the race issue for a minute, because there's profit in race. There's profit in race, and there's always been a profit in race. So when you start threatening the profit of race, then that's when you become adversarial. You know, many people know, and it's no mystery, that we were in the Moorish movement. While in that movement, we, because of the founder who was teaching the same things back in the 1920s that we're speaking about right now, about it was crazy because I don't want to call it the limitations of race. Ali just explained that when it comes to whiteness, race is a good thing. And how I used to describe it was like being in the middle of an ocean, and blackness was an anchor that weighed us down, and we could never swim to the surface, whereas whiteness acted as a flotation device. And this is for other people, the people that are already classified white. I mean, they're already living on the surface. You know, they're already cruising in yachts, speedboats, all types of cruise ships, if you will, down to little canoes if they want to. Either way, they're able to get across the ocean. For us, blackness, the opposite of white, has this anchor, or serves as an anchor, I should say, that weighs us down, and it prevents us from floating to the top. This is why every time you try to bring a case based on, every time you try to do something legislative wise when it comes to race, they shoot it down. When there's an injustice in the courts have a standard called but for, and they ask you to prove, but for race, can you prove that our disproportionate executions of black men usually is based on some form of racial bias? Forget the fact that you've executed 100 men, 100 black men, the fact that you've executed 10 white men, well, that's enough to say that, see, we're not biased. These 10 people, whites were executed too, right? And this is me using the racial terminology in their justification, because Michelle Alexander, in her book, The New Jim Crow, she highlights this without that or this understanding that we have, Brother Ali, to peer at race, not just from, the standpoint of where we are now in this reparations space, but what we learned in the Moorish movement about the fictitious nature of race. We were able to put those lenses on and see why Erica Alexander, as great as her book wasn't necessarily able to pinpoint any remedy to get around. Not necessarily, she didn't pinpoint any remedy on how to get around that. And so her job then was to just chronicle the injustices, et cetera, et cetera. Our job is to pinpoint the remedy. So, and one day we may do a book club book review on The New Jim Crow. I know I've spoken about that in the past, so y'all look out for that. I think it'll be powerful for us to bring that book back up into the public eye and put our Freedmen lenses on and dissect it.
But now you said Erica Alexander, you meant Michelle Alexander.
I mean, Michelle, I got a living single on the brain.
Just want to say that. And then even socially, if you think about just recently, I wanted to, because this is very interesting. Beyonce was denied any kind of nominations for her country music album in the CMAs, it's Country Music Awards. Now, I want you to think about this. As light in complexion as she is, and even with the fact that she wears long blonde hair, even though her records, that country music, was it Country Carter or whatever it was called, it kind of had some, it had some appeal. It had a mass appeal to it. I don't know what the sales were, the streaming numbers were, whatever. I have to look into it. But she didn't even get a nomination in the Country Music Awards. But the point being is that even with the way she looks and the fact that she created a country music album that could and probably should have been nominated for something, she was not. Her father believes that she was denied a nomination because she's quote unquote black. The point is that even with her financial status, being married to somebody that they say is a billionaire, having the level of hit records that she has, the amount of hit records she has, the social status, the economic status she personally has on her own, the fact of the matter is, see, look, Dolly Parton defends the CMA Awards, right? So the point is that white people, even when you reach a certain socioeconomic status, will still let you know that there are places that you are not welcome, places that they will use their white status influence to keep you out of. You see what I'm saying? And so it's just like, the point is like, regardless of that, because I know some people think that, yeah, if you get some money, like Oprah, if you get some money like Beyonce or the Carters, that, you know, nah, you can't. That's not it. That's not it. At the end of the day, there's a certain group of people in this country who possess the stain of slavery. And at the end of the day, there's a certain group of people who have been racially categorized as white who don't possess the stain of slavery, who wants to keep those who do out of certain spaces and to be able to maintain their positions of power and influence without you coming in to those spaces. And so that's just the bottom line. It is what it is, man. And I know sometimes people think money is the answer. It's not simply the answer to what we're talking about. It's not simply the answer to what we're talking about.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you know, this was a powerful lecture given by our brother Ali, aka Ali Scientific, because we call him the professor over here, scientifically deconstructs, especially BS. he scientifically constructs the useful and gainly parts, but also scientifically deconstructs the nonsense. And so, you know, I'm hoping everyone enjoyed this presentation. We will be back on this channel. This is the Freedmen University channel. For those of you who've been following this, you know, our platform, you will know that this is the original Be the Power channel, and we moved it to the other channel. Make sure you subscribe to the Be the Power channel as well. We have 385 live listeners right now, with 356 of them on Twitter/X. You know, go to the Freedmen University channel. You know, it don't take nothing for y'all to go over to go on to YouTube, punch in Freedmen University, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, click that little bell icon, then punch in Be the Power, do the same thing, subscribe to the channel, hit that little bell icon, because we're going to be adding a lot more content soon. You know, political season is among us, and we're going to definitely keep this thing going. So, you know, I want to give a shout out to everybody that has joined us this evening. Brother Ali, I'm gonna let you close it out, man. Again, that was a powerful, powerful presentation.
I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who tuned in. Hopefully, the point was made. I hope we clarified it. I think that with this presentation, we can now move on from all of that kind of sidetrack and stuff about white freedmen. There are no white freedmen, family. Let's just keep it a buck. There's no white freedmen. There were no white slaves. There were no white people emancipated by the Emancipation Proclamation of the 13th Amendment. So therefore, there are no white freedmen. And the descendants of those emancipated are the people who are in that same class of people, are those who are racially categorized as African American, blacks, coloreds, and Negroes. Okay. And it's as simple as that. Simple as that. Whiteness shields these people from anything that has to do with us. This is why people come to this country and aspire and want to be white adjacent, because whiteness protects them, and whiteness provides them the ability to live a full American life without the stain of slavery and the stigma, the curse, and the sin of slavery on them. So no, the freedmen class are those of us whose families came up from slavery in the United States that are racially categorized as Negroes, blacks, colors, African Americans. Period, point blank. End of story.
All right, with that said, fam, we are going to close it out. I don't know, Ali. I'm thinking about doing a whole different intro and outro to the channel, to the Freedmen University channel. We will be adding a lot more content here. We're going to get active on other social media platforms like TikTok as well, because we have to spread this information. The people need to know this. They've boxed us out of the Democratic National Convention. When I say boxed us out, they didn't mention reparations. Van Jones said it, man. reparations for the past? No. Like, that's not what Kamala represents at all. So I just want to make sure that the people understand that. So we're going to do our job. We're going to do our job. It is our hopes that people pick up on the information and spread it.
The information said LA Born said the information.
I think he wants, I'm not sure if that's a brother or a sister, wants the link to the Alabama case.
Alabama case.
That talks of the Alabama Supreme Court case, talk about freedmen status.
Yeah. I can tell you the citation. Wait a minute. You know what? Because hold on 1 second. Hold on. Let me just go to it. I was actually like, was it in the beginning? It wasn't really the beginning. It was like a 37th slide in the thing. It's Jeffries versus State. Hold on.
Can you share it real quick? All right, that's his sister. That's his sister. Shout out to the sister, LA Born, DC Love.
All right, hold on. Let me share the screen. Can you see it?
So that's the citation right there. LA Born, DC Love, Jeffries versus State, 39 Alabama, 655 in the excuse me, in the year 1866. Look that case up. That case, man, we was going over it a couple weeks ago, man. That is a powerful, powerful case right there. And as we advance this Freedmen work, as we construct our arguments, especially like the one where we're refuting the guy that wrote that article that's affiliated with the ADOS organization, we're gonna simply show and prove like we always do, man. Nobody can deny our scholarship over here. You can hate us, love us, be in the middle. You cannot deny that we are, if not the premier or the best premier educators in this space. And we don't claim to be on a level of professors or anything like that have more broader knowledge. But when it comes to this right here, it's like that movie Fresh, when Samuel L. Jackson played the father to the young boy Fresh about chess. He said, put him on the clock, I'll tear his ass up too. And that's how we feel, fam. Put any of them on the clock with us, and we gonna tear them down. Not that we're trying to tear them down. I'm just saying it seems as if they're trying to tear our arguments down for the sake of pushing the thing that they're trying to push. And I'm merciless when it comes to that. If I feel you're being obstructive, then you're gonna get this work too. I don't care who you are. Period.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
All right, fam. Let's end this thing, man. Ali, again, good looking out. I'll leave you all with the motto of our platform. We might have to come up with a new motto for Free You. F you to all our haters, of course. Free you to the fam. We might have to come up. We might have to come up with something. I don't know yet. We'll work on that. We'll work on that. All right, fam. Yo, so I'm going to still leave you with the motto of the platform, which is don't just fight the power, become the power. And then and only then will you have the power to make a change. And with that, I say peace.